Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the nerfs to the Elemental Shaman on the 10.2 PTR and Season 3 of Dragonflight. Now, before we get our pitchforks out and start dooming and start rushing the gates of Blizzard, let's kind of pull it back a little bit and talk about the nerfs as a whole, and then we'll get into the whys and the whats and the hows of these nerfs, because there are reasons, but we'll get into them. Let's just talk about it first. So first off, the 2 set was nerfed. It now grants an Elemental Blast at 70% damage instead of 100% like it was, and then the buffs last only 10 seconds instead of 15 seconds. The 4 set was nerfed in 2 different ways. First, the 2 extra lava bursts that are triggered from the 4 set now deal 65% of normal damage instead of 100% of normal damage. And then also the burn from the lava burst is now only 10% down from 15. So those are the 2 big things affecting our tier set. On the other side of things, one of the talents, Further Beyond, had already been changed once. It used to be an infinite duration on Ascendance. Then it was a max duration of 150%. And now it's down to 100. So Further Beyond is essentially effectively a dead talent now, and I have a lot of issues with that by itself, but I was not really a fan of Further Beyond, but I would prefer them to just take it out of the game at this point, rather than leave it in as it is. Further Beyond, I think at this point, is just completely garbage tier, and there's nothing that actually could be done to Further Beyond at this point, in its current state, where it would ever be worth taking. And the fact that they made that decision, they took a talent that was absolutely worth taking, regardless of the fact that I didn't like playing with it. I didn't like that playstyle at all of like permanent ascendance at the time. They took that talent that worked and turned it into something that's not possible to even be good anymore, I'm pretty sure. So that talent is completely dead. So they simultaneously nerfed our entire tier set, and then also killed off the top performing build that we were using for that 1 week period between the previous week and this week. So our top builds got nerfed and our tier sets got nerfed. So where are we at now? We're about 20% overall nerf from where we were before in single target, and that's kind of where we stand. So before we get too crazy about all these nerfs, first we should talk about why this happened. And the big reason to this is our tier set, especially in single target, was accounting for somewhere around or close to 50% of our overall damage when you count everything up. 50% overall damage from a tier set. So that's basically if you didn't have the tier set but were running the build and then did have the tier set running the build, a 50% damage increase is kind of insane. The highest they ever seem to feel really comfortable with from a tier set perspective is typically around 20%. That's like on the high end. The average tier set typically contributes about 15% damage across the board. If we're averaging all the classes and specs, different tier sets, it's usually around 15%. 20% would be fairly high. So where does ours land now? Ours now lands around a 20% damage increase, down from where it was at 50%. So a huge nerf to the tier set. However, it does seem justified with just how powerful it was in comparison to the spec. Now, the reason why it feels so bad to be looking at these nerfs and how incredibly impactful it was just from single target alone is because these aren't going alongside compensation buffs. You would expect something of this level of a nerf to come with some things to help prop up the spec a little bit more, because if we were to go live today with the way that this is set up, we would probably be lower mid, maybe even lower than that. It's hard to say. Obviously not everyone's sims are out yet or are being shared publicly yet, but would probably lower middle of the raid in a pure single target situation. So that is, it doesn't sound very good, especially for a class that has low defensives, does not bring a raid buff, and has negative community perception already attached to it. It's really not going to be enough if it stays just like that. So we should expect some compensation buffs. I just don't know where they're going to happen from. The biggest or the best take that I've heard on this, the reason why there aren't compensation buffs right now, is because Blizzard most likely wanted to get these nerfs out, get the tier set in line first, see what happens to the spec after that, after testing has been done with it, and then look at where they can buff us back up so that we can be somewhat more propped up and not just have this massive nerf. Like if they had just slapped on some buffs onto this, they might have missed the mark. They would have needed to do more tuning. It makes sense for them to want to see how this impacts Elemental and then apply appropriate buffs after they've seen the testing. So that makes sense to me. For me personally, like if you can tell, like from my tone of voice, I was completely expecting this. I was not expecting us to go live with the way the tier set was. It was comparatively way too powerful. It was very much an outlier as far as like how powerful the tier set by itself was, not elemental, but how far the tier set itself was. Just further ahead than any other class or spec that I knew of at the very least. And those other classes and specs that had been very high, I think Demonology Warlock was one of them that had like a 50% tier set bonus at one point during PTR. That also got nerfed down way before ours did. So this was always going to happen. I didn't talk about it too much because I didn't want to put the numbers out into the ethos, and I didn't want to get blamed for getting us nerfed because this was always going to happen. So with that being said, hopefully we will get buffs moving down the line as we go through the rest of PTR. We were strong in single target. We probably weren't the best. Maybe we were, maybe we weren't. There's only like really 2 pure single target fights that I can think of off the top of my head, like right now, in the raid in general. So single target is really not that important this tier. There are definitely places where single target is very important, but there's definitely like a lot of fights with a lot of ads or things where you would need to have access to more than just pure single target. So it is less important overall, and we are very strong on spread cleave like Council and Agira with the spears. So there's a lot of things still to kind of like figure out and how that would work out, because things like as soon as you start adding like random ads at very specific intervals, it's very hard to get real power levels comparatively. So we'll see how that all pans out. But moving on, we will go ahead and we'll talk about some builds. This build that we're looking at right now is considered a release candidate. And typically what that means is that they're not going to be making any more major changes. You won't be seeing huge swathes like this and everything else above here. All these huge changes. We're probably going to start seeing nothing but numbers tuning. So with numbers tuning underway, moving forward, we can probably start to talk about builds in a little bit more of a concrete fashion, and they won't be changing the week to week. That being said, Elemental does have a ton of builds that are very similar, but have very minute differences, but we can start to kind of talk about them, but they are still being tested, so just keep that in mind. So moving over to our pure single target build, it would look something like this. This was something we saw a little bit of towards the end of Season 1 for Vault of the Incarnates. This is considered the Mountains Will Fall fire build. So we have Mountains Will Fall down here, and we have Primordial Surge, we have Ice Fury with Flux Melting, and Aftershock as like the kind of the major players here. Now, if you're worried about things like Ice Fury, just like in Season 1, you're only pressing Ice Fury as well as Frost Shocks when you don't have access to Lava Bursts. Now that will happen definitely in this build, but at the end of the day, your major gameplay loop that you're all trying to do is just Lava Burst as much as you possibly can, and then when you have enough Maelstrom to do so, you can press Elemental Blast. In pretty much every single one of these builds that we're looking at right now, as it stands right now, as I'm talking about it, you are ignoring spenders when you are in a deeply rooted elements ascendance proc. You're just pure lava bursting, and that's it. Regardless of situation, you're just going to be using those lava bursts, and you're going to ignore your spender. That's how it is right now. That might change. We'll see. Our spenders are just not hitting very hard right now, and not only that, our tier set is feeding back into that feedback loop of getting back to Primordial Wave because of rolling magma. So the more lava bursts we get out, the more cooldown reduction we get on our Primordial Wave, which gets us our tier set activation back, and we just want to keep that loop going as much as we possibly can. So Lava Burst has a very, very high priority in these builds, and I don't see that changing at all as it stands right now. There's no way. I don't really see how they would make that change unless they buff like Ice Fury by like 400% as well as the Frost Shocks. They might be able to buff the spenders to a point where that makes sense, but as of right now, that's not looking to be the case. It's just Lava Burst, Lava Burst, Lava Burst. If you don't have a Lava Burst, then you would cast Ice Fury, then you would cast Frost Shock, and if you're out of all of that, then you would cast Lightning Bolt. So very similar to, or basically the exact same as we saw in Season 1 if you were someone who used this build. If we're talking about single target where we might have occasional ads, this would be something like Agira, or if Agira is one of them, Laridar might be one. You might run this on Council. You probably wouldn't run Liquid Magma Totem on Council because you can just spread Flame Shocks and keep them rolling with Flame Shock and with Primordial Wave, and there's only 3 targets. But for Larodar and Agira specifically, you might run something like this. You might also run it still with Echo Chamber and Mountains Will Fall. But basically what this allows is just a little bit more AoE by spreading those Flame Shocks, and then getting, you want to, especially with AoE, you're just trying to be chucking out as much Lava Burst as you possibly can, hoping to trigger an Ascendance proc. You may, if it's a longer period of time, or if you need a ton of burst, you might take the route of coming down here and grabbing Stormkeeper as well. But this is still at its heart a single target build. So this would be for fights where you specifically want to be focusing on single target, but then you do have adds that regularly spawn that will live for a little bit of time, where you could actually get some benefit out of spreading that liquid magma, or the Flame Shocks from our liquid magma totem. And then we also have Wind Speakers that help us get more of those lava bursts to help maybe either get an Ascendance proc or have our Primordial Wave come back off cooldown a little bit quicker. So that is a possible build that we might see on 2 or 3 of the bosses in the raid. And then our more all-purpose build that we might see for Mythic Plus, or just things with a lot of adds, is something that you might be familiar with. This is very similar to what we were running in Season 1 for the Wildfire build. It's very similar to that. The only difference here between OG Wildfire and this one is, instead of using our Skybreaker's Fiery Demise, we are again using Windspeaker's Lava Resurgence. That allows us to just get more access to more lava bursts. You're also even in AoE, once you've got your Flame Shocks out, you're pretty much ignoring Surge of Power still. And then because of that, because you're ignoring the Surge of Power, our lava bursts are gaining the value of Surge of Power. Therefore, you're getting the cooldown reduction on Fire Elemental that you would have been getting from Skybreaker's Fiery Demise. You're just not getting the critical strike chance on your Flame Shocks. And Flame Shock doesn't seem to be hitting nearly as hard as it was in Season 1 comparatively, so it's less of an issue. Again, it's all lava burst all the time, pushing down some earthquakes to get more lava bursts because of Wind Speakers, and just continuing that loop, hoping for Ascendance procs. It does give you a good amount of funnel. If there's like one target that you really want to have dead in a Mythic Plus environment, you can really hone in on just that one and hope to get some spread cleave from your lava bursts, and as well as putting down your earthquakes to kind of hit everything. And you still have access to your Stormkeeper for the big bursts of damage, but also getting that Maelstrom so that you can then drop an Earthquake so that you can then get a Lava Burst. So it all comes back into Lava Burst again. It does feel better overall than it did in Season 1, in my opinion. Again, it's all Lava Burst all the time, so if you like that, you'll like this. And it also is not nearly as bad in single target as we were in Season 1. From what I'm seeing of early sims, it's looking to be about 7% behind this build here in single target at current. So if nothing changes, it's about a 7% loss to go into this version of Wildfire over your just pure single target, which is I think that's in better shape than it was in Season 1. The difference between this Wildfire build and then single target. So I think they're a little bit closer together, but it's 7% can, numbers can be tricky. It's hard to say exactly how big of a drop this is going to be. I am worried about the fact that the tier set getting nerfed, how that's going to impact us in Mythic Plus. I will be testing that this weekend. I'm recording this on, what is today? Early on Thursday. I will be doing a little bit more Mythic Plus testing later today, but I wanted to go ahead and get this recorded. I'll probably post something in the pinned comment if there's something that really sticks out to me as I do that tonight, but I don't really expect anything to be majorly different in terms of its gameplay, because nothing really affected that gameplay-wise. You're just going to be chucking Lava Burst, dropping Earthquakes, and then using your Stormkeeper when you have it. So those are 3 builds that we might see coming up in Season 3 of Dragonflight. So going back to the nerfs, yes, they were warranted. It does feel bad that we didn't get any compensation buffs right now, but hopefully next week or even the week after, we do see something to kind of prop us up. Again, I am worried about Mythic Plus just because these buffs or these nerfs might actually affect it in just a worse way. Enhance is already doing really, really well in Raid as well as in Mythic Plus, and because they bring Wind Fury Totem, they're already going to look better on paper. And I'm just really worried about the community perception. Another problem, especially in Mythic Plus, and I'm just kind of talking all over the place now, but that's okay. One of the problems about Mythic Plus for fire builds, because it takes setup time to get these Flame Shocks out, especially if you're a gamer who plays like in 20 or less, there's nothing wrong with anything like that. But especially like in the 10 to 15 range, you might be in a situation where people are killing the ads before you can even get set up, and then moving into the next pack where you don't have a liquid magma totem or something like that. And it's going to be very challenging to get your setup going where you have your flame shocks out before you can actually start to do some real damage. I'm worried about that kind of community perception if like ads are just dying way too quickly, how that's going to reflect back on Ellie because it already has such a negative community perception already by being the only spec in the game that has no access to anything that would be considered a raid buff. I mean, obviously, I would actually consider, like, because Resto isn't really, Spirit Totem isn't always really good, and then with Death Knight, Death Grip isn't always required. Those kind of also fall in the same category. But for some, like Ellie has definitely been under the radar, or not under the radar, under the microscope recently. I mean, I think Max has been very vocal about it on his stream. But if we don't get anything, it's just going to be, all that's going to be left in people's mouths is the taste of Ellie just being this black hole of not really having a fit anywhere. And if Enhance is actually going to end up being as good as I think it is, it's going to just have a even bigger negative shadow cast across Elemental. Now, again, things can change. We'll have to wait till next week and the week after to see what kind of buffs, because at the end of the day, damage is king, and if we do the most damage, no one cares about anything else. That has always been true. Everyone likes to talk about utility and defensives, but if you do the most damage, no one's going to care about any of those other things. So there's still a chance, but yeah, let's be realistic. We're probably not going to be at the top of the top of the raid now with these nerfs, but who knows? It'll be interesting to see how raid testing goes on Friday as well, with some of those bosses, see how we deal with these nerfs. I don't know. We'll see. The worse we look, honestly, on Friday, the better, because hopefully we can actually get some good compensation buffs. But we'll see. We'll see. It's still up in the air. There's no, I wouldn't doom about this specifically. Everything that you can see written down here, I would not doom about. What I would doom about, if you're going to doom about anything, is the fact that we didn't get those buffs. But like I said, they probably want to see how we play first and then give us those compensations where we actually need it. One more thing on that. I know I've just been kind of talking all over the place today. I know that some people will probably call out that we need to have spender buffs. Our spenders need to be doing more damage, but they would have to be buffed an insane amount before they start being worth using. I know I said, like, in pretty much every single build for single target, you're pretty much going to be casting Lava Burst regardless. If you're in Ascendance, you're not going to be casting Elemental Blast. You're just going to be pumping out Lava Burst after Lava Burst after Lava Burst, and you're just going to ignore your Maelstrom. They would have to buff these spenders by so much that I don't think that'll be the way that it goes. I think a lot of people in the Elemental Shaman theory crafting community also agree with that there's just, they would have to buff them by so much before we start seeing some real value out of that. So that probably won't be the thing that they go towards. I think there will be buffs to it. It's just, will that make a difference? Probably not, especially on a gameplay level. Maybe it'll help us out doing just more damage in general, but it'll be hard to kind of guess at. We'll have to just wait and see what they do. But maybe we'll even get Lava Burst buffs. Who knows? Anyway, that's pretty much it. That's everything I wanted to talk about today. Again, don't doom on the nerfs. Just be very, very hopeful about the upcoming buffs, hopefully, that exist. But other than that, guys, I do all of my testing on PTR live at twitch.tv/Ridmark. So if you're interested in that, feel free to give me a follow over there. I do have a Discord that I'll have in the description if you're interested in asking me anything personal, or about the channel, or about the YouTube, or anything about Elemental. And if you want to keep your ear to the ground about the most recent changes, or anything about the theory crafting community for Elemental Shaman, feel free to join the Earthshrine Discord, and that is the Shaman Discord, and then come to the Ellie channel and see what the buzz is about on a day-to-day basis, or ask any kind of questions that you have to a more general audience. But other than that, that's pretty much it. I hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you in the next video.